Yeah, hello and welcome to our lecture series Climate Protection of today. So, as mentioned, the presentation from Christian Matt is postponed. Now we found a date. It will take place on the 21st of June at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And today we have a special guest, Anna Leitner from Global 2000. But before, Hendrik Poulsen or Nadrup will present, as mentioned in our introduction lesson, the exam procedure, including the survey. We'll explain how it will, will be performed, and I'll give the presentation to Hendrik. 1 second, please. Okay. Now you can share your screen, please.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, it works. Thank you.
And you hear me too?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I would like to make this short. You have already been introduced to this a bit, and you've seen these slides before, but just really briefly. So I'm Hendrik, and I'm here in Innsbruck, and we actually got a big project here about science communication. And I think you taking part in this lecture, you probably also know the value of science communication, which plays a particular role also making climate science. So what we did a kind of a different approach. In the end, what we did is we made a game. So I can now call myself not only a scientist, but a game developer. Let me see. Yeah. So, and here we've been developing this for quite a while, and this is basically kind of what it looks like. And it's a card game. And we took a bit of a different approach in the sense that this is not an educational game, but instead it's a game to raise awareness mostly. So what we really wanted to do is to make a game for gamers so that it's fun and enjoyable. And then its theme is all about science. So this is what we have done with this, and so far I would say we've received a lot of good feedback. So hopefully it will be out there soon, and we're now making various studies, including the one with you. So, and how the science communication really works is there is a real concept, a real scientist or whatever, and this is embedded into our game, you know, on a card. And then we have a website here on the right, which has even further information about these concepts. So, and you can look up this website and check it out and see all of this. And on the cards themselves, there's like small little gimmicks, so to say, that also tell you about the concept on the card or the person. In this case, a quote by Einstein about Emmy Noether, one of the most famous and most impactful mathematicians. So, and of course, we can embed in a similar way concepts that might be relevant right now in this lecture, which you find particularly relevant, maybe like the environmental impact in this nice image here, or the planetary climate crisis. And yeah, it's all part of this kind of game. So, but why am I saying this? This is to kind of tell you to be also creative about how you do science communication, right? And in the end, what it came down to here, we have a nice image, we have a nice game and whatever, but in the end, the information is often conveyed not only as an image, but also just as a text, right? A flavorful text in this case sometimes, or a more informational text like on our webpage sometimes. But it all comes down to a text, and we arrive there in different ways. And so what we wanted you to do also for your exam now is in the end just write a text. Just a text about your research and your research and how it's related to climate science, or the other way around. But how you arrive there, we want you to be a little bit creative, to think about creative ways to think about how you want to convey this idea. So, and this we want to do since we want to also see how you feel like doing that. We wanted to do this in a kind of intervention study, it's called. So for that, we would ask you now or in the next week to fill out a small survey. Takes not longer than 10 minutes. And Rainer will send you a email about this, about the details here. And then in a second step, that is after a week from now, you will get all the information of how to actually proceed. That is, you get a template about what the structured summary should look like, and what the 300-word summary could look like. That you will write and be which you will submit at the end of this course. You will get all of these information after you have filled out the survey, which ends on the 7th of June. And after that, here you get you get all the information. And then the deadline to submit all of this onto OLAT will be the 14th of July. Yeah. And after you've done this, after you've submitted this structured summary and the general public, the summary for the general public, you will then fill out another survey, a so-called post-intervention survey, to see what your opinion really about science communication is, and trying out different ways of doing this. So yeah, that's basically it. So do you have any further questions about this? All the details will be sent in an email, like there will be first email now, today or tomorrow, and another email a week later. And the last email with the last link to the last survey will be then sometime in July after you've submitted it.
Okay, thank you very much. So, any questions? Is it clear so far? Okay. Yeah, I think that's quite okay, and thank you very much. I think that's a really good introduction for what will happen, and I hope you feel inspired to do so. It's the first time that we do it in this way, and I hope it's fun and yeah, a new quality of science communication. Thank you very much.
And I hope so too. I am happy for everyone who joins in the survey. And of course, we have a little bit, at least for those, we will select some winner, whoever wrote like a couple of winners, so to say, that will get a prize, which is actually, who will get this game, so to say, sent to them for participating in this survey as a thank you. So it's really appreciated if you would do this. Of course, it's optional, but yeah, we would very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for the chance. Okay. Yeah, then I think we proceed to our guest, Anna Leitner. So welcome. Anna Leitner is from Global 2000. I'll show you the slide. Oh, Anna, are you in the call? Hi. So I can give you the moderator. Okay. Yeah. Hello, Anna. Yeah, Anna Leitner works for Global 2000 as a resource campaigner and speaker for supply chain and resources. As you know, Global 2000 is an Austrian environmental protection organization based in Vienna and supported by activists and volunteers throughout Austria. Before, Anna Leitner worked as ESG corporate rating analyst and worked for BOKU in the field of resource management. And today in her lecture, she will talk about the EU Supply Chain Act and how it, or this act could help for climate protection. Welcome, Anna Leitner.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this lecture series. I'm sad not to be in Innsbruck physically, but I hope we can have a meaningful 1.5 hours today together, at least in this hybrid way. Yeah, my name is Anna Leitner. I'm campaigner for resources and supply chains at Global 2000. Global 2000, for those who might not know exactly what it is, it's Austria's biggest independent environmental organization and part of the International Friends of the Earth network. So as the name already says, we recognize that we live in a global world, so we are not only Austrian, but we are part of the biggest environmental grassroots network worldwide with organizations in almost all countries. A few short words about me. As said in the introduction, I studied bioresource management, environment and bioresource management at BOKU in Vienna, and then environmental sciences at BOKU and in Copenhagen. I come from a small town myself in Upper Austria, but studied in Vienna, and then I decided to move abroad again and spend some time in Munich. That was at an ESG ratings firm, and I think that is something that is not so common, that is not so much known. It's environment and social governance and ratings of publicly listed companies. What does that mean? So that companies that which shares are publicly traded. So I analyzed if they are reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, or if they are upholding human rights in their supply chains. In doing so, I gave them grades from mostly very bad to maybe a little less bad. After that, I worked as a Blue Book trainee, as it's called, at the European Commission, and I would say that both experiences drastically shaped my activism today. So that's why I mentioned them. I studied environmental management, but didn't really imagine myself as an activist professionally, but here we go. Now I am at Global 2000. I just think it's also always interesting to see, especially when one is still studying, what different lives can look like, and how people got to what they are doing today. Today at the lecture, I really want to make the most of our time here and of our days, of yours and of mine. So my biggest wish is for you to really ask anytime if there's any need for clarification or comments or questions. Just raise your hand. I think Rana Pfluger is surveying the room, and also online. Please don't hesitate to interrupt me. I really want everyone to get to the same conclusions out of this. So it's good if there are any questions about definitions, go ahead. Now we will try out if the setup works, and you can actually see the next slide. I'm gonna change here. Yes. So I want to start with a question to all of you, and that is, how are you feeling today? Are you feeling motivated? Are you feeling frustrated? Are you feeling angry? The multitude of emotions to be expected. We're in a climate lecture series. I cannot see the room, unfortunately, but I would want you, just so you also know how everyone else is feeling around you, to raise your hand if you feel motivated today. So I can't see it. I hope you can see amongst each other. Raise your hand if you feel frustrated today. And now raise your hand if you feel angry today. And I'm going to raise mine. I'm really angry today. I will tell you later why that is the case. Emotions are way too often ignored, so that's why I wanted to bring that in here now. But because I think we need to acknowledge that we are dealing with huge crises, we are dealing with huge transformation ahead, and I think most importantly, those emotions that we all have, they can be fuels. If we ignore them, they are just going to be very painful in the long run, often also in the short run. But if we dive into them, sometimes they can be fuel. And so thank you for this overview that you mostly also gave each other in the room. I also want to mention emotions, but because I think from the way I outlined my lecture that I'm going to give today to you, it's possible to categorize a little bit the emotions that we're going to go through all together while we go through the contents. So we're going to start at a topic that is on the top of everyone's mind, I think, is overconsumption and how much we are wasting, how many resources we are using. I think it's on top of everyone's mind, at least in the small bubble that I'm dealing with. But I think it's going to make us angry. Then we are going to talk about some insufficient solutions. I think that every one of us hears a lot thrown around, be it greenwashing or technological solutions being offered that are just not far-reaching enough. And I think this is a part of the game that makes us all frustrated from time to time. And then I want to end with a vision and about corporate accountability and about what was in the title of my presentation, how this corporate sustainability due diligence directive, as complicated as it sounds, can really contribute to global climate justice and real transformations. Yeah, so there we go. Let's dive into the angry emotions. As said before, they think they can be fuel. So overconsumption, what is it? We think at Friends of the Earth and Global 2000 that climate crisis is in a way a symptom, and overconsumption can be seen as a disease. The slides that you're going to see and all the nice illustrations, they come from our Friends of the Earth Europe organization, and we have a website presenting those contents, and I think yeah, they're just really well structured. So I'm quickly going to go through to talk about the need for this bigger paradigm shift. So we're first going to talk about the disease, the sickness, this overconsumption. Then we're going to talk about the wrong medicine, those insufficient solutions that I mentioned that are very frustrating. We're going to look at the root causes of this disease, and we're going to look at the treatment. So where we are going to look forward to the treatments and to the visions of a positive future. Now, first up, the disease. What is it? So we extract, produce, and consume and waste more than ever. We also know that the consumption of resources at the current levels makes up for about half of all emissions and more than 90% of biodiversity loss. When we talk about resource consumption, we mean mineral resources, so we mean everything that is used for building construction, but we also mean natural resources, so all the resources we use for food production, feed production especially, the soil that we seal, for example, and we talk about also the metals that we need, which we'll get to a little later. So the current system that we have in the EU and in Austria as well is based on an even growing and more growing consumption of those resources that are actually exhausting the Earth. We are crossing planetary boundaries, and that are also exhausting human beings. Important to know is here the overconsumption that we're talking about is not just the individual consumption. It would be way too easy to reduce our consumption as societies on the phones that we buy or the clothing that we wear. Crucially, this is the consumption of us as a society. So we also talk about the consumption of resources for infrastructure. It is not my personal decision if a new highway is being built, for example. So we go beyond the consumption of an individual in the supermarket and look also at the consumption of resources and materials for the military, for energy systems, for all the supply chains that are globally in action to produce products and services that we need. So if we, so if we look at this disease overconsumption a little closer, we can even see that this is really a disease that is also wrong for us as human beings. First off, the 1 billion richest people actually consume 72% of the resources, whereas the poorest 1.2 billion people in the world only consume 1% of the resources. So we see a big divergence and inequality of resource use. That is being shown most drastically actually by the Earth Overshoot Day. That's the day when we have used all resources that the Earth can regenerate within a year. For Austria, this Earth Overshoot Day is actually on the 6th of April this year. So we are using more than 3 Earths. We are using way more than the fair share that would be distributed to us just based on the number of people that we are here in Austria. So an example for this gross overconsumption is plastics. The production of plastics has actually grown exponentially in the past decades, and the industry is even planning to quadruple, 4 times more plastic production by 2050. This is really insane when we see where plastics already can be found now, and when we look at what the plastics are actually used for in Europe. So they are used for mostly for packaging, the biggest part, and then they are used for a lot only single-use plastic packaging still. Austria has a big role to play in this plastic production, as our national oil company, the OMV, is the 11th biggest plastics producer in the world. So Borealis, a big plastic producer, belongs to OMV, and they are also planning to increase production of those plastics. This is just one example of gross overproduction, but I think something that is very present, unfortunately, in all of our lives. When we look at the disease, we see that the consumption of resources is distributed very unequally, but also that the impact of the production, of the extraction of the resources, and of all the production steps is also distributed very unequally. So we can see that in countries of the global south, the effects are felt much more worse than in rich countries as Austria. At the same time, the overconsumption in countries as Austria is not even making people that much happier. So we see, now it's not shown in that, I don't know for what reason this graph doesn't work properly, but it's supposed to show a graph that is actually flattening towards the right. So with more money does not come that much greater happiness. And we see that in all statistics. Now, there are proposals out there, and there are a lot of how we can solve those issues, but a lot of them are actually the wrong medicine. What is now being proposed by lawmakers, politicians, policymakers in the EU and in Austria is a lot of times what could be called green growth. It is a lot of times what is labeled under circular economy. And it's a lot of times not a solution because it is still focused on actually producing and consuming more to keep the economy growing. There's a lot of talk about innovation. There's a lot of talk about more good products, but actually the overconsumption of unnecessary products is not being discussed as much as would need to be. And the effects that we see is that when the amount of materials, for example, that will be needed in the future for the energy transition, it's shown that there would be a need for 60 times more lithium, 15 times more cobalt by 2050. But those assumptions are based often on the underlying assumption. Those extrapolations actually often rely on underlying assumption of more growth. And we are running into a situation where we actually substituting our dependence on fossil fuels with a dependence on what is now called critical raw materials. So there is now a lot of talk about this and a lot of talk about the need for these new materials and the need for more extraction also in Europe for those new materials. But why am I saying that this green growth and the focus on circular economy without bigger changes in the underlying assumptions is the wrong medicine? So it's often said that we have already reduced our greenhouse gas emissions while also keep growing our economy. But when you look at more than just emissions, when you look at also imported emissions, when you look at different planetary boundaries, and when you look at economies as a whole and globally, there's no scientific basis for assuming that decoupling, so decoupling of GDP growth and environmental impacts, can happen fast enough and can happen sufficient scale and for all those environmental impacts. So we are kind of running in the wrong direction and trying to do some good things, but we're still running towards that goal of more growth. Because at the same time that we want to decrease maybe the use of some bad products with a lot of the policies actually that are part of the Green Deal, there are more than 100 billion euros each year spent in the EU for advertisement. And a lot of those advertisements are not to actually address needs, but why are there advertisements? They are to create wants and to make us think that we actually need products and services but those are actually wants and not needs. So we have to differentiate there. Now, the root cause, as we can see, and the reason why this green growth is not a solution is the systemic obsession with growth that we have fueled in our economic system. It is really incredible to see when looking at the numbers, but a 3% GDP growth today would be like adding the entire global economy from 1970, the whole year, to our current economy. So it is quite obvious from the numbers that there needs to be a change in the economic paradigm to actually be able to stay within the planetary thresholds. And we all know those warnings of recessions, but actually we can see that this systemic obsession with growth will lead to a collapse of the economy, because it cannot on a finite planet continue to grow exponentially. As said, the problem is with the Green Deal that it is based on the assumption that there can be decoupling, but it's not actually scientifically proven that this decoupling is actually possible. So we have to let go of this paradigm in order to finally be able to solve the climate crisis, or to address the climate crisis, and at least stay within, get back into some of the planetary boundaries and solve the social crisis as well. And for this, we need to get rid of this overconsumption and have to get to a new economic paradigm. So we have some solutions that would address that at least a bit, which would be binding reduction targets for resource consumption for the EU material footprint. And there are some things ongoing, like for example, the Austrian circular economy strategy that is setting some of those reduction targets. It's just that they are not binding, but we are getting there in the conversation. And yeah, so now in Austria and beyond in Europe, we need this new economic paradigm, and that also means a lot of other changes in the economy, frankly, to be able to actually reduce overconsumption and end growth dependency. We need a good life for all, but that also means that we need a new economy. And at Friends of the Earth Europe, we have developed something that we call the 7 Sparks to Light a New Economy. In German, we call it 7 Ideas for a New Economy. And this is these are visions. These are just parts of what a new economy can look like. But I want to dive deeper into one of them later. I'll just go through all of them because I think it's so really refreshing also sometimes to think about this bigger picture, and to even in discussions about the climate crisis, or especially in discussions about the climate crisis, not stay within the confines of the climate discourse and this scientific technical discourse, but as actually to open up and talk about everything that is in there as well. We'll just get right into it. So the first spark, the first idea is that we need an economy that is within the Earth's limits. So that should be fairly clear from the angry part of my presentation just now. We need an economy that is more circular. We need resources to be used locally. We need supply chains that are actually transparent, that value human rights, that protect the environment. We need sovereignty over resource use. And that are just some of the keywords that are that can be found in those ideas. One concept that has also gained traction, that can fit or that can visualize a bit what is meant, is the donut economics. Short question to the audience, that again I cannot see you, but maybe Pfluger can give me a little bit of an indication. Who knows the donut economy concept?
Know about this? The donut? No, they don't know about.
Oh, great! Wow, that's great. So I can actually tell you something new. Potentially, so.
Elisa, could you tell?
Okay. Can I continue?
No, Elisa also not. Okay.
Yeah, also not. Great. So if you could just mute the audience again, I'm really sorry, but I always hear myself otherwise. Thank you. So the donut economy is a concept developed by researchers, amongst them Kate Raworth. And we all know what a donut looks like, right? It's this, ring. And I always get hungry when I talk about it. But the idea is that the outer boundary of the donut gives us an indication of what the world looks like. It's more or less round, and it has boundaries. It has limits to growth, actually, a concept 51 years old. And the inner boundary of the economy are the social foundations. So they are the need for housing, the need for food, the need for security that us as human beings have and us as societies have. And so the donut indicates how this is the minimum that an economy has to fulfill, that an economy has to produce and put out as services to satisfy the needs of societies. And the outer boundary of the donut, wait a second, okay, I'm really bad at showing this now, but you can see this would be a circle here around. The outer boundary symbolizes the outer boundary that the earth gives our economy. And everything in terms of economic activity, our economies have to fit within this donut, respecting the social foundations, but also staying within the planetary boundaries. And it's really a concept that is first and foremost also good to visualize in our heads what we need and where we need to get to. And the donut cannot grow exponentially because the physical limits are set. It's also a tool to analyze how far countries have come and regions have come in achieving these social foundations and staying within the planetary boundaries. And actually no country in the world is near being having an economy within the donut. So most countries like Austria, industrial Western societies, massively overshoot those planetary boundaries, be it the climate, be it the biodiversity crisis, extinction, or be it nitrogen cycles, phosphorus cycles. So there are 9 planetary boundaries accompanying them all, freshwater. While other economies and societies lack fulfillment of the social foundations. So in a way, we are all developing nations because we all need to get this to this sweet spot of humanity where our economies are fit within the donut. So this is roughly also what the economy within Earth limits wants to say. Excuse me, I'll close it now. So here, then the next idea, the next spark is that we need a truly democratic and participative economy. There is no way of achieving the massive transformations that we need without democratic institutions, without decentralized power sharing among citizens, without citizens' assemblies, and very crucially, without rules for lobbying. I think sometimes we've already all heard in media as well talk about all those lobbyists and maybe even Brussels and how it's full of lobbyists. I don't know if that's something that everyone hears, but I can attest in my function as a good lobbyist that is true, and there are so many lobbyists, and there is a lot of wrongdoing in that as well. And I'll maybe get to that a little bit later on when I do the deep dive on the corporate sustainability due diligence file. But we absolutely need rules for ensuring that our decision makers can actually be held accountable. And so this is, I think, something that is super crucial and also important to highlight in order not to get into some kind of ecofascism frames, as well, there's a tendency to happen amongst some people. So also mentioning that in our ideas. The third is a public future, and I think it's very well, hard to imagine sometimes, but I just heard today a really wonderful example of what a public future actually already looks like in the present and has looked like for a lot of years. You all know libraries, right? Libraries are actually a form of a public service and a public future, a circular economy, a universal basic service, so everyone can read. Water, as it is organized in Austria, is a universal basic service. We all need drinking water, so we have a public water supply, and we organize it in a way that no one will be left behind and no one will have too little drinking water. Commons are also part of this public future. Community-owned renewables, something that actually is already now possible in Austria, those Energiegemeinschaften, energy communities, so that we can co-own our renewable energy generation. Local currencies are also part of this future. So you can see this is really a very diverse set of solutions, and I think it's always motivates me, at least, because we can see that there is a part to play for a lot of people and a lot of those solutions. Idea 4 is about work and how we need to rethink working. We need a broader definition and value of work, so we need a reduced work time and work sharing. Could also mean job sharing of important positions. For example, we need equality and rights in work environments, and we also need a cap on salaries for those higher up in the food chain, so to say, in companies, so that there is not anymore such big divergence. When I was rating those publicly listed companies, we had one indicator that was looking at the ratio between the CEO salary and the median employee salary, and the numbers I've seen there, 400 to 1, so the CEO would earn 400 times as much as the median employee, is really out of control, and literally out of control, because it's now something that we as the public cannot control, but that we should regain control of in order to have more equal societies. So we also have to rethink the role of businesses. There have to be smaller companies with stronger regulations, and the companies need to be purpose-driven, so actually produce something or do something, provide services that actually have a purpose, that address needs, rather than existing for their own sake and producing, I don't know, let's say, very sugary drinks, for example. So role of businesses, and then idea 6 is about trade and solidarity, international relations. Here, that it's about actually creating solidarity and ending extractive industries, diversifying supply chains, diversifying everywhere, so that not one country is dependent solely, over 70% of their GDP on the export of one metal, for example, as is often the case now. And you can also see the supply chain due diligence again popping up here, as it has already in one of the earlier solutions. I will get back to that. Yeah, and then idea 7. I think 7 is a wonderful number. I don't know who decided it was 7 ideas, but let's keep it at 7, which is something that is also very close to me. It's the fact that we need new values if we want a new economy. So, for example, sufficiency is one of the values, being able to say this is enough. Care and empathy are values that also play into, for example, this area of work. So how do we value, how do we treat people who care for each other? Equality and inclusiveness, but also autonomy. And this is also in contrast to what is often put forward nowadays in terms of freedom, while freedom is a concept as a concept, and as is used now, for example, the freedom to go as fast as I want on the highway can destroy someone else's lives and right to live. So the autonomy, in contrast, really is a positive frame of being able to choose. Yeah, and those are the values. But now I want to get deeper into this supply chain due diligence. Just shortly, still, why? So we've looked now at those broad concepts, really, like everything that has to change. But of course, well, not everyone changes at the same time, but sometimes there are laws on the table that we have to fight for now to get parts of this new economy and parts of this new world that we want. So as campaigners at environmental organizations, as in my job, I always try to have this broad picture in mind, but then at the same time, we also want to really do policy work and influence real laws that are really being discussed now, because we know that there are hundreds of lobbyists also trying to influence this, and not in the way that we want it to go. So one part of a new economy is actual corporate accountability, so we can hold companies accountable for the wrongdoings in their supply chains. And luckily, or thanks to immense pressure for a lot of years from civil society, there is now an EU law at the table that could implement for the first time really global corporate accountability for European companies and companies that act on the European market. It's called Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which is a horrible name, and in German we call it Lieferkettengesetz, which is even more horrible because it's totally inaccurate. We are this is really a bad start. So there is a law on the table now, but it does have some holes, actually a lot. It's like Swiss cheese. And we are fighting with a coalition of other NGOs, with trade unions as well, to get a good law implemented. We are part, as Global 2000, of an Austrian campaign called Menschenrechte brauchen Gesetze. You can find it on the bottom left. And we are also part of a Europe-wide campaign called Justice is Everybody's Business. So you can find it on the top left. And the photo is from an action we did just this week, actually, because tomorrow the European Parliament will vote on its position to the supply chain, and we here address the members of parliament at the EU level, so the EU MEPs, and tell them that they must now deliver. And I think you can really see the diversity of movements that are united in this ask, really, from children's rights perspective, protection against child labor, to environment with WWF also on board, to Global South, Voices of Global South, but also to trade unions in Austria that are part of this struggle for holding companies accountable. So I think we have just a short check of the time. I think we have until 5:30, so I'll do this a little more quickly and then open the floor to questions at around 10 past. Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah, I take this as a yes. Good. So just to kind of recap, I think value chains are often very hidden in our daily lives, but they are very present in the global economy. We've seen a little bit about the discussions with value chains that were not functioning. So a lot of times something comes to the top of our mind only when it's not working, right? And that was the case during Corona and the energy crisis, when there were supply chain disruptions. Globally said, products have often networks of value chains, and if you look at one company, then there is on the one hand the supply chain, so the value chain before the company, that starts at where the resources are extracted, in the further refinement of the materials, in the production of the products. But then after the company, there's also the value chain that involves the clients, that involves further trade, that involves us as consumers and users of the products, and that involves often, in a not circular economy, the end of life, so waste treatment, etc. And we can see that around that we have positioned, I'm sorry, that's in German, all the different environmental impacts, but also social impacts that arise in those global value chains. And I want to focus on one in particular, because we are in a climate crisis lecture, and it's the emissions along the value chain. These are the emissions that Apple reported for the year 2021. They report that in their sustainability report, and it's very sneaky, because when you look at it, the numbers don't seem so clear on first glance, but Apple's own emissions, so that is direct emissions that arise on their premises and indirect emissions that arise in the production of the electricity that they source, make up less than 1% of the emissions that they are actually responsible for. More than 99% of the emissions that can be attributed to Apple actually arise in the extraction of the resources for the smartphones and laptops, in the assembling of the smartphones, in the end of life of the smartphones, in the use of the smartphones. So everything that actually Apple is in a way responsible for, but that is indirect. And there's this wonderful graph from the greenhouse gas protocol showing those emissions, emission categories. So we have those direct emissions that are called scope 1, and some of you have encountered that in discussions about what companies can do. A lot of times companies are saying that they are already carbon neutral. A lot of the big internet companies are saying that, when they're actually only talking about those scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Those are the easy ones. But then the scope 3 emissions are actually where the big deal is. Now the question is, who is responsible for those emissions? The problem is that today in most countries, the corporations can't be held accountable for the destruction, and including also the emissions that they cause internationally. So we've seen that in the past decades, production has been outsourced, and there can be no consequences for the impacts that are then located, for example, in India or in Pakistan. The companies often say that they don't know where the resources are coming from. So be it, for example, a company like Apple, for years saying that they don't know where the resources for the laptops that they produce come from. And we see that almost all the emissions are actually indirect emissions in scope 3, as said before. The corporate accountability law that is now on the table is asking companies to analyze the risks in their supply chains for a multitude of topics, to take action, to assess the effectiveness of those actions, and to communicate about it. So this is essentially, very simplified, the process of due diligence. Sorgfaltspflicht in German. And what is covered by this? So it should be the entire value chain, and it has different aspects covered. So for once, the human rights, but also environmental conventions. The drastic thing really about this is that the Paris Agreement is not listed in the conventions. So it is not included for now in this corporate sustainability due diligence directive. Not really, at least, because it is not covered by the liability. So it is not covered with consequences. In general, the corporate sustainability due diligence has an administrative liability. So it means that the states will be able to check if companies fulfill their due diligence. and on the other hand, the civil liability, zivilrechtliche Haftung in German, that really is the crucial part of this law, and it will ensure that affected people and their representation, so NGOs like us, can hold companies accountable in European courts. As said, though, climate is currently not on this list of conventions, so it's not actually part of this due diligence yet. It remains to be seen, or it is now up to the discussions among the institutions in the coming months if it will be part. And this is basically what I'm working on full day, every day, to get this climate due diligence and to actually make this corporate sustainability due diligence directive a tool for global climate justice. We have a small foot in the door, so to say, because there is a climate plan in this file that is like standing a little awkwardly separate, but it's full of exceptions, and it doesn't really have quality criteria, and it doesn't really have an obligation attached to implement the plan. So we have a little foot in the door. Climate is in there somehow, but we want it to be really fully included. And I'm getting to my last slides now. I'm not gonna keep you waiting any longer for questions. So what we are fighting for now is climate due diligence, essentially. So we want a law that can make corporate companies accountable for their climate impact. And we are not alone in this. More than 200 NGOs and activists, including Fridays for Future Austria, have joined us already. Dozens of experts and scientists say that such a law is necessary, and crucially, also more than 70%, so 74% of Europeans, and also we have the results in Austria, want such a law that can hold corporations accountable. I think the majority of society is sick of companies evading responsibility. So our demands are to put climate in this definition of impacts, so that it actually also is attached to the civil liability and to the consequences, to put Paris Agreement in the list of conventions, and to make the Article 15 more concrete, so that the climate plan is actually valuable, because it can be if it's not greenwashing. And I'm asking with my conclusion now today also to join us in this fight for climate due diligence, to join us to be active citizens. I know it can sometimes be hard to find an entry point, but it's a wonderful time for being active, and really do join us in events. So this is a direct invitation. We have on the 16th of June an event that is called Resources Less, but Less is Fair, where we will talk about the supply chain law. We will talk about the circular economy. We have great guests also from South Africa, and you can watch it on live stream. I don't know how many of you are actually based in Innsbruck. Maybe some of you are based in Vienna. Then register for the event. Sign up also for our newsletter of Global 2000. You will get many information about the ongoing campaigns, including also the due diligence campaign. And there will be a petition that you can sign in July. You will know about it via our newsletter. And yeah, one last thing, also tweet your MEPs. Tomorrow is immensely important vote in the European Parliament, and a lot of the lawmakers are listening more to those corporate lobbyists than to the human beings that they are actually meant to represent in the European Parliament. So the more human beings that they represent, text them, write them, tweet them, the greater the chances that they actually move in the right direction. So with this, I reach my last slide. I hope you are now motivated, that maybe the anger fuels you as much as it does me, the frustration is kept to a minimum, and you can contact me anytime. My contact details are on the site, and they also will be sent to you. Yeah, and now to the questions. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. Yeah, so you started your presentation with the wrong medicine, as you called it. So you said the circular economy is wrong medicine. Could you explain this a little bit more? I couldn't understand it in brief.
So our economy definitely needs to become more circular. That means everything from putting a deposit on our plastic bottles to making industry processes more efficient, to everything in between that is defined also in the circular economy strategy. What we caution is seeing circular economy as enough or the solution, because what happens a lot in discussions around circular economy is that there is suddenly a focus on the technological solutions that actual companies that exist today can implement and make money with. So the focus is a lot of times in the discussions on recycling, and we see that as well with funding that goes to research, for example, that a lot of the focus around circular economy is on those steps that are actually in the hierarchy quite low, and not such a lot of focus is on the steps that are ranked high in the circular economy hierarchy. So reduce, rethink, redesign. Because honestly, if we quit fast fashion, and we have to quit fast fashion, there's no way that fast fashion can continue to exist, for example. Or if we quit private cars, and there's no way that many private cars can exist, so there's no way that the car industry can continue to exist, then that also means losers, and we have to be in a way also honest and clear about that. And what we caution is like having this really nice win-win-win circular economy frame all the time, because it's also not very honest, and it can lead to just more material use if used wrongly. Shortly said. I just come from a discussion at Pfluger about circular economy, where we're circling around the same topic actually.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? There's a question in the chat. No question in the chat. Yeah, so what you also mentioned is about the sharing of renewables. So could you give examples about that? So one example I found here in the area in Tyrol is sharing some heat source for heat pumps. That's interesting. I think they take the energy out of the soil, and they share the heat for many households, not only for one, but for several. Within a small city, there is not enough space for all for people for drilling, so they can share the heat. But what's in your mind? What examples are about sharing the renewables?
I think Denmark is a great example in that. There's this big offshore wind park just outside of Copenhagen that is actually owned by, I don't want to say numbers because I forgot it. I just heard about it again last week. But from the top of my head, I think thousands of citizens that live in Copenhagen co-own this offshore wind park and have been using electricity basically without costs for years now. And this is such an example. My hometown of Gmunden in Upper Austria is now setting up energy corporation. I think they just started last week officially, and they want to expand that further, which basically also will be, I think, including geothermal energy. Yeah, there's all sorts of examples, and I think this is a great way of decentralizing the energy system and also making it more fair and ensuring that the profits of the theoretically cheap energy that that the sun and the wind provide to us are not concentrating within the hands of a few, but are actually well, benefiting all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was really frustrating 2 years about the no climate due diligence. So, yeah, what do you think was the reason for failing in this part? Because it's all well prepared from the Commission or from the framework around, but not included in this this framework. What is the reason for it? What do you think?
So the reasons for not including climate in the due diligence in the first place in the draft of the Commission was that the reasons were manifold, but a lot of them had to do with intense lobby pressure ahead of the publication of this draft, and also cold feet by the part of the Commission. Because climate and it's incredible to say that, but climate is still being seen as something new, and therefore there was hesitancy to actually already include it in such a strong law. But I think we can see, and that's coming from me seeing well, hundreds of companies while I was doing those ESG ratings, we can see that companies already have guidance on what they should do. It's just that a lot of companies ignore the guidance. There are voluntary initiatives. There is something called the Science-Based Targets Initiative that has quite clear rules on how to set targets as a company. We also should have established by now that drilling new oil fields is against climate due diligence and is against all climate targets. So it's not new, but I think, yeah, one of the reasons why it was included was that it would be very powerful. So the good thing is that the process for your law at the European level doesn't end with the Commission proposal, but it only starts with the Commission proposal. The member states made their position in autumn, in December last year. They did not include climate, but they did put a bit more details into this climate plan. And now the Parliament is forming its position, and it looks better in the Parliament. The Parliament, the ENVI committee, so the environmental committee that was dealing with the law, with those environmental aspects, as well as the Justice Committee that is dealing with the whole file, included climate due diligence. So we had big wins there. Now tomorrow there will be the vote in the plenary of the Parliament, and we are seeing immense backlash and yeah, industry associations. Actually, it's not so much neutral companies, but a lot of times industry associations lobbying against this. So this is again why I asked you to also get active, because I think a lot of people, a lot of us actually think that this should be the bare minimum, and oftentimes, well, lawmakers don't always hear that often enough. Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do, but we really need the voice of a lot of people.
Okay, yeah. So let's hope for the future. Yeah. Any other questions? Doesn't seem so. Yeah, then I would say thank you very much for your lecture and the discussion. Yeah, so we will see next week, and yeah, we'll wait for my email. I'll send around the information from today. yeah, you will find the slides on online. Thank you very much and goodbye. See you.
Thank you again for the invitation. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.